No one expected a lion cub with no heartbeat to come back to life, especially not on the side of a canyon in the middle of a dust storm with no tranquilizers, no fancy equipment, just an old ranger, trembling hands, and a choice no one else dared to make. In the moment when everyone thought it was over, something unthinkable stirred. A creature shaped like a lion but bearing a coat no one had ever seen before. And from that moment on, everything changed. The alert came just before dusk. At first, it was just a faint ping on the old monitor in the corner of the ranger station, so easy to miss, so easily dismissed. But Nash Morgan wasn't a man who dismissed anything, not anymore. The signal blinked again, red this time, pulsing from collar unit 117B. He recognized that tag. Rhea, the lioness who had once clawed her way back from the edge of death after a poaching incident and had become, in the words of every researcher who'd met her, a miracle in motion. Nash stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he studied the heat signature on the tracking interface. It was erratic, stuttering. Not the slow, deliberate movement of a lion on patrol, but the panicked tremors of something in distress. Her heart rate had spiked, then dipped sharply. Breathing patterns were shallow. Then there was nothing but a flat line for nearly 20 seconds. He leaned in. Static distorted the feed from the cliffside camera about 2 miles east of Sector 4. But even through the dusty distortion, one image froze him in place. A male lion, massive, unmistakable, stood in front of the lens, not charging, not roaring, just staring, head low, shoulders trembling. His name was Bram, the dominant male of the region and Rhea's mate. He never came near cameras, never acknowledged the scent of humans. And yet now he was standing still, eyes locked into the frame like he knew someone was watching. Then, as if pushed by a breath of wind too heavy for the machine to capture, the camera shifted. And behind Bram, for just a flickering moment, Nash saw her. Rhea, lying in the red dust, still. He didn't hesitate. His fingers moved fast, calling the emergency line reserved only for life-or-death wildlife situations. A direct line to Arizona's Department of Environmental Protection, activated only when lives, not just animal lives, but endangered ones, were hanging on the edge. And in the wilderness, that edge was always closer than people imagined. Code 3, full medical response, he told the dispatcher, his voice calm but clipped. We have a female lion in active distress, possibly obstructed labor. Location is grid G19 near Santa Elena Ridge. You're sure it's labor? The voice on the other end asked, professional but skeptical. I've seen it before, Nash said, but not like this. He clicked off and turned toward the supply wall. The med pack was already loaded from a recent patrol. He added a second oxygen kit, a portable heat lamp, and the trauma field kit. He hesitated, then pulled out the old emergency satellite flare, the one used only when things turned bad enough for helicopters. From the other room, the sound of footsteps approached. You're going out alone? It was Alara, the wildlife vet who'd joined the department 2 years ago. Her tone was skeptical, but there was worry in it too. Not alone, Nash said, zipping the med bag. You're coming with me, and we'll need Jonah. Alara stiffened. He's a trainee, Nash. He's barely been through one live op. He'll carry the tranquilizers and backup oxygen. He's light, fast, and he knows how to stay quiet. That's all I need. Alara crossed her arms, then nodded reluctantly. Give me 5 minutes. Outside, the desert was shifting. The wind had picked up. A storm was moving in, dry, electric, the kind that didn't bring water, just heat and static. The kind of storm that could turn a rescue into a recovery mission in seconds. Within minutes, the three of them were packed into the department's off-road utility vehicle. Nash drove, Alara rode shotgun, and Jonah sat silent in the back, clutching the gear like it might vanish if he let go. The sun was setting fast, bleeding gold into the ridgeline. Shadows stretched longer with every mile. Nash didn't speak. His hands were steady on the wheel, but his jaw was tight. His last rescue hadn't ended well. He could still see the flash of the leopard's eyes, the way her body convulsed, the stillness afterward. He hadn't moved fast enough, hadn't trusted his gut. That night had taken something from him. He wasn't about to lose another one. "We're not taking the main trail?" Jonah finally asked, voice barely above the engine hum. "No," Nash replied. "We cut through the dry wash. Faster. She doesn't have ours." Jonah looked out at the rugged path, clearly wondering how they'd make it through without snapping an axle. "Don't worry," Elara said dryly. "This truck survived worse. Barely." They reached the edge of the canyon just as the last light disappeared behind the cliffs. The tracking signal from Rhea's collar had gone quiet again. Not dead, but intermittent, as if her body no longer had the energy to send steady pulses. It was a bad sign. The terrain became too rough for the vehicle, so they packed the essential gear and continued on foot. The path was steep, winding through rock formations that jutted up like the bones of a buried giant. The wind howled between them, sending sand slashing across exposed skin. Halfway up, Jonah slipped. His boot caught on a jagged stone, and he tumbled sideways. Nash turned just in time to see the boy's pack tumble out of his hands, and with it, the tranquilizer kit. The hard plastic case hit the rocks and bounced once, then vanished over the edge of the ridge. Jonah froze. "Oh, my God," he whispered. Elara rushed to the edge, but it was already gone. She turned back, eyes blazing. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" Nash held up a hand, calm but firm. "We adapt?" "But without the tranquilizers—" "We adapt," he said again. "We're not turning back." The silence that followed was heavy. Jonah nodded, shame sinking into his shoulders. Nash handed him the oxygen canister instead. "You carry this. Don't drop it." They reached the final ridge just as night settled fully. The stars were sharp above them, but the wind was louder now, moaning through the canyons like something alive. Below, in a small clearing surrounded by stone and sand, they saw her. Rhea. She was barely moving. Her body was half-curled, legs twitching weakly. Her ribs lifted and fell in shudders too shallow to sustain life. Dust clung to her flanks like frost, and standing over her, unmoving, was Bram. He didn't growl, didn't charge. He just stared. At them. At Nash. His eyes burned amber in the moonlight, wide and wild, and in them was something Nash had only ever seen in people. Desperation. Nash stepped forward slowly. Elara reached out, grabbing his arm. "You don't have the tranquilizer. If he decides—" "He won't," Nash said, never breaking eye contact with the lion. It was a ridiculous thing to believe, reckless even. But some part of him, some deep, stubborn instinct, believed Bram knew exactly why they were there. And then, impossibly, Bram took one step back. Not much. Barely a pace, but enough. Elara sucked in a breath. Jonah looked like he might faint. Nash knelt slowly beside Rhea. Her breathing was thin. Too thin. He placed 2 fingers near her chest, feeling for movement, for heat, for anything. She trembled once, then went still. Nash looked up at Elara. "She's going into collapse." Elara was already unpacking the oxygen unit. "Then we need to start now." The wind howled louder, kicking sand across their backs. The rescue had begun, and none of them, not even Nash, had any idea what they were about to bring into the world. The wind cut harder as the 3 of them moved closer, carrying with it the sharp scent of blood and dust. Nash felt it settle in his chest, heavy and familiar. He had been in moments like this before, moments where time narrowed, where every decision felt like a clause in an irreversible contract. The kind of moment no insurance policy could ever cover, no legal protection could undo once it was signed by fate. As Ilara fitted the oxygen mask over Rhea's muzzle, Nash's hands worked on instinct, steady, despite the tremor running through him. He adjusted her head, angling it just enough to keep her airway open. Her breath came in shallow, uneven pulls, like a failing engine struggling to turn over one last time. "She's exhausted," Ilara said quietly. "Her body's been fighting this too long." Nash nodded, but his mind was already slipping somewhere else, back to a night he had tried and failed to forget. A year earlier, under a sky just as dark, he had knelt beside a leopard in labor. The terrain had been easier then, the equipment complete, the protocols clear. And still he had hesitated. He had waited for authorization, for confirmation from the regional office, for the kind of bureaucratic clearance that worked well in offices but meant nothing in a medical emergency out here. By the time permission came through, the leopard's breathing had slowed, then stopped. The memory pressed in on him now, sharp and unforgiving. He could still hear the radio crackle, the measured voice reminding him of liability concerns, of risk management, of how decisions had consequences. No one had said it outright, but the message was clear. Follow procedure, protect the department, minimize exposure. The leopard had paid the price. "Ilara," Nash said, pulling himself back. "Talk to me. What are we dealing with?" She didn't look up as she checked Rhea's abdomen, her fingers pressing gently but with purpose. Active labor that stalled, possibly obstructed. She's lost too much energy to push on her own. Jonah hovered a few steps back, gripping the oxygen tank like a lifeline. His face was pale, eyes wide. "Without tranquilizers, can we even do this?" Ilara finally looked at him. "We don't have the luxury of perfect conditions. Out here, you don't get ideal. You get now." Bram shifted, his massive frame blocking the wind as he repositioned himself closer to Rhea. His low rumble vibrated through the ground, not aggressive, but filled with a tension that made Jonah's breath hitch. Nash raised a hand slightly, not toward the lion, but as if grounding himself. "He's not threatening us," he said. "He's watching." The words surprised Jonah. "How can you be so sure?" "Because if he wanted us gone," Nash replied, "we wouldn't still be standing." Ilara glanced at Bram, then back at Nash. "You know her history better than anyone. You raised her after the snare incident. If there's anyone she'll tolerate this close, it's you." That knowledge settled over Nash like weight and responsibility combined. Rhea had been little more than a trembling adolescent when she'd been brought to the rehabilitation center, her leg torn, her future uncertain. He had been the one to sit nearby during her recovery, speaking softly, never touching unless necessary. When she was released back into the wild, she had paused at the edge of the enclosure, looking back at him with a gaze that felt too aware to be coincidence. Now she lay dying in front of him. Her body suddenly convulsed, a sharp spasm that lifted her slightly off the ground before she collapsed again, gasping. Ilara swore under her breath. "She's losing the rhythm. If we don't act, we'll lose both her and the cub." "The cub," Jonah repeated, voice cracking. "There's still one alive in there?" Ilara met his eyes. "I wouldn't be here if there wasn't." The wind shifted again, and from somewhere beyond the rocks came a distant sound, a laugh, sharp and unmistakable. Jonah stiffened. "Lions?" "No," Nash said. "Lesser predators, hyenas. They can smell this from miles away." Jonah's grip tightened on the oxygen tank. "So not only are we trying to save her without tranquilizers, but we might have company?" "Welcome to field medicine," Ilara said grimly. "It's like emergency care without a hospital, without backup, and without guarantees." Nash felt the old fear stir, the one that came from knowing that if things went wrong, there would be reports, investigations, questions about liability and responsibility. There would be talk of whether the risk had been justified, whether the department should have intervened at all. But none of that mattered here. He leaned closer to Rhea, his voice low. "You're not alone. You don't have to fight this by yourself." Her eyes fluttered, barely opening, but for a brief second they focused on him. Her chest rose, then fell again, uneven but present. Ilara took a slow breath. "I'm going to try external manipulation. It's dangerous, painful. Without sedation, she could react." Bram's head lifted slightly, his gaze fixed on Ilara now. The air felt charged, like the seconds before a storm breaks. Nash didn't look away from Rhea. "Do it," he said. "I'll keep her steady." Jonah swallowed hard. "And if something happens," Nash answered without hesitation, "then we live with it, but we don't walk away." Ilara placed her hands on Rhea's abdomen, applying careful pressure, her movements deliberate and controlled. Rhea let out a strained sound, half growl, half whimper, her muscles tightening beneath Ilara's palms. Bram took one step forward. Nash raised his voice, calm but firm. "Easy. She needs this." For a moment that felt longer than it was. The lion stood frozen, muscles coiled, every instinct screaming to intervene. Then, slowly, he settled back onto his haunches, his eyes never leaving Rhea. Jonah exhaled shakily. "I don't believe this." "Believe it," Ilara said. "Sometimes survival doesn't look like strength. Sometimes it looks like trust." Rhea's breathing hitched again, then steadied just enough to continue. Ilara adjusted her position, sweat beading on her brow despite the cold wind. "There's something blocking the canal," she said. "If I can't shift it—" She didn't finish the sentence. Another distant laugh echoed through the night, closer this time. Nash glanced toward the darkness, then back at the lioness beneath his hands. The past was pressing in, the future uncertain, and the present demanding everything he had left. He tightened his grip, grounding himself in the reality of now. This time he wasn't going to hesitate. Bram didn't move, not even when Nash knelt inches from the lioness. The big male stayed exactly where he stood, his golden mane stirring in the canyon wind, his eyes never straying from the humans now invading the most vulnerable moment of his mate's life. He wasn't growling, he wasn't pacing, he was simply watching, every breath, every twitch, every shift in their posture. And it was enough to make even Nash hesitate. Rhea's flank barely rose. Her breathing was like the last flame in a lantern, flickering, wavering. Nash looked over her body quickly. Her abdomen was grotesquely distended, a hard mass sitting where there should have been movement. Her tail was limp, her limbs splayed in unnatural angles, and her gums, when Ilara gently peeled back her lip, were pale gray. Blood flow was collapsing. Ilara swallowed, wiping her forehead. "Her cervix is dilated, but there's no visible progress. She's not pushing anymore." "She's out of time," Nash said, voice low. Jonah crouched nearby, his face pale, oxygen tank braced in his arms. "What do we do without sedation?" Ilara didn't answer immediately. She was staring at Bram now. The lion took a single step forward. Jonah flinched hard, his hands jerking. Nash held out a hand. "Don't move." Bram didn't charge. Instead, he lowered his massive frame to the ground. One front paw stretched out near Rhea's back leg, the other tucked under his chest. His eyes never blinked. "He's not guarding," Ilara murmured, breath caught in her throat. "He's witnessing." Nash nodded slowly. "And giving us permission." It felt like trespassing on sacred ground, but Nash didn't waste the moment. He shifted closer to Rhea's head, easing her jaw open to adjust the portable oxygen mask. A thin hiss of air filled the silence. Her lungs barely responded. "I need to check fetal position," Ilara said, voice steady but strained. She slipped on surgical gloves and moved to Rhea's abdomen, using her fingers to gently press and map out the internal pressure points. There's a solid obstruction. Something's lodged near the canal. Could be a twisted fetus. Nash's stomach twisted. You can fix that, right? Not without trauma risk, and not without painkillers. We don't have that luxury. The wind shifted again, colder now. In the distance, a lonely howl echoed between the stone ridges. Coyotes, drawn by scent. Nash glanced up the path. We're not alone. I don't care about them, Elara said, brushing grit from her arm. I care about her. Jonah, get the light closer. I'm going to attempt manual repositioning. Jonah brought the beam forward, his hands shaking. Nash held Rhea's shoulder gently, his grip firm as Elara reached beneath the lioness's tail with expert precision. Suddenly, Rhea's entire body shuddered. A deep sound rose from Bram's chest. Not a roar, not even a growl, just a low, sustained vibration. Not a warning, a lament. Easy, girl, Elara whispered. Stay with me. Rhea's back leg kicked slightly, her paw dragging across the sand. Elara worked with both hands now, her brow furrowed. I can feel a leg, maybe two, but they're locked wrong. She's trying to push, but the birth canal's blocked. If we don't reposition, she'll rupture. Nash looked at her. Do it. Hold her steady. He didn't respond. He just leaned closer, whispering something only he and the lioness could hear. Elara closed her eyes for half a second, then began. The procedure took minutes that felt like hours. Every breath was a calculation, every movement a gamble. Jonah's hands trembled so hard he had to steady the light against his knee. Nash could feel Rhea's heart through his palm, uneven, weak, skipping like a tired drum. Finally, Elara exhaled sharply. It's moving. Whatever it is, it's turning. A moment later, Rhea let out a hoarse exhale, and her abdomen twitched. A contraction, not strong, but definite. She's responding, Elara said, a flicker of hope in her voice. We may have cleared the way. Jonah let out a strangled laugh. Then we're good? Elara shook her head. No, that was just the beginning. The moment of reprieve didn't last. Nash looked up. At the edge of the ridge, barely lit by the moon, two glowing eyes reflected the beam. Hyenas, he said. Elara tensed. How many? 3, no, 4, maybe more. They'll smell the blood. They already have. Jonah's face went pale. They won't attack, right? Not with him there. They all glanced at Bram. The great lion was on his feet again, head raised, muscles rippling. But he didn't charge. He stayed beside Rhea, his presence a barrier the scavengers dared not cross. Not yet. They'll wait, Nash said. That's what they do. We can't move her in this condition, Elara whispered. No, but we can protect her. Nash stood, pulling the emergency flare from his belt. He lit it, the red blaze cutting through the dark like firelight in a graveyard. The hyenas flinched back. Bram did not. He stood still, only his tail twitching. Let's get ready, Nash said. Elara, keep the contractions going. Jonah, second oxygen tank now. As the hyenas crept along the outer edge of the light, Rhea's body jerked again. Elara knelt, checking position. Something's coming. A contraction rolled through the lioness's abdomen. Her body strained. Bram let out a breath that sounded almost like a prayer. And then, in a rush of wet breath and effort, the first cub emerged. It was small, limp, still. Elara reached down, cradling the slick body in both hands. No response, she said, voice tight. Nash dropped beside her. Heartbeat? She pressed 2 fingers to the tiny chest. Faint, very faint. Nash didn't hesitate. He took the cub, wrapping it in a sterilized cloth and gently rubbing it to stimulate breathing. Elara positioned the oxygen mask closer to its nose. Come on, she whispered. You're here. Just breathe. Jonah stared, eyes wide. It's not breathing. It's not. Then a sound, a tiny gasp, followed by another, and then a weak, scratchy cry that barely broke through the canyon wind. Bram stepped forward. He didn't roar. He didn't growl. He simply lowered his head, nose close to the cub, and let out a soft, rumbling sound that made the hairs on Nash's neck rise. "He knows," Ilara murmured. Nash looked at the small creature, still trembling in his hands. Its fur was lighter than he expected, too pale, almost silver under the flashlight beam. Strange markings, faint but real, traced across its sides. "Ilara," Nash said. "Look at this." She did, and her eyes widened. "That's not normal pigmentation." "What is it?" She shook her head slowly. "Genetic anomaly, maybe, or something rarer." The cub whimpered again, louder this time. "Whatever it is," Nash said, "it wants to live." The flare burned out. The shadows crept closer, but none of them moved. They were frozen in the moment. 3 humans, 1 lion, 1 dying lioness, and a newborn cub who should not have survived, but did, because they refused to let him go, and outside the light, the wild world waited, hungry, silent, watching, just like Bram. The cub lay nestled in Nash's hands, its frail body quivering with the effort of each breath. The silver coat glistened faintly beneath the lantern light, patterned with soft, almost imperceptible streaks, like dusk shadows on snow. No one spoke. Not Jonah, who had forgotten to blink. Not Ilara, who still knelt at Rhea's side, hands slick with blood and dust. Not even Bram, whose massive head hovered just inches away from the tiny creature, his golden eyes reflecting more than just the firelight. Then the wind shifted. It was subtle at first, a gentle whistle through the rocks. But Nash had spent enough years in the wild to know what that meant. The temperature was dropping fast. A high-pressure system was closing in from the north. Night would harden quickly. They were running out of time. He looked at Ilara. "How's Rhea?" She wiped sweat from her brow with the back of her sleeve. "She's bleeding more. She needs fluids and warmth, or we lose her in under an hour." "Another cub?" "Maybe." Her abdomen still distended. Jonah finally found his voice. "We're not doing this here, right? We're moving her?" "No," Ilara said flatly. "If we move her now, we'll lose all of them." Nash nodded. "Then we build the field shelter, right here." They worked fast, each movement driven by the silent thrum of urgency. Jonah unrolled the thermal barrier and hammered its corners into the ground, using flat stones. Ilara started the portable heat lamp and adjusted it toward Rhea's exposed flank. Nash retrieved the backup battery and aligned the field monitor to track vitals, not just for the lioness, but for the newborn. The canyon around them had darkened. The stars overhead blinked sharp and cold. The cry of a hyena echoed closer than it should have. "We need to light the perimeter," Nash muttered. Jonah grabbed the motion-triggered flares, setting them along a rough semicircle around the shelter. Each one beeped once, then blinked a soft red, forming a fragile line between them and the unknown. Bram still hadn't moved. He sat at the edge of the light, half-shadowed, body massive against the rock behind him. His ears twitched with each hyena call, but his gaze never wavered from Rhea and the cub. Then, from deep inside Rhea's body, a spasm rolled. Ilara was already there, gloves back on, kneeling low. "It's another contraction." "I thought she didn't have the strength," Nash said, leaning in. "She doesn't, but something's triggering her instinct. Maybe the first cub crying?" She reached down, careful and steady. Rhea moaned, a sound like crushed gravel. Her legs kicked weakly. "She's trying," Ilara murmured. "Come on, girl, help me." The second cub slid free a moment later, larger than the first, tawny and warm, its body twitching with immediate life. It cried before its lungs had even cleared. Jonah gasped. "It's alive!" Ilara handed it off, quickly to Nash, who wrapped it tight in cloth and set it beside the silver cub under the heat lamp. "She's amazing," Jonah whispered. "No," Ilara replied, eyes locked on Rhea. "She's surviving." Nash checked the vitals on both cubs. "First one's stable but still shallow. Second one's stronger. Better breathing? Responsive?" He paused. "She might not be done." "You think there's another?" "There's space in the abdomen. Not definite, but possible." Jonah let out a slow, nervous breath. "Can she survive another?" Ilara didn't answer. Instead, she reached for Rhea's abdomen again. Her fingers moved in small practice circles, searching for tension, mass, or movement. "I feel something," she said finally. "Another cub? Or blockage?" At that moment, one of the perimeter flares blinked yellow, then red. Movement. Nash turned, flashlight beam scanning the edge of the ridge. Two hyenas crept just beyond the Guyao boundary, eyes catching the light like mirrors. "They're testing the edge," he said. Ilara didn't even look up. "If Bram doesn't move, they won't attack." "He's holding them back," Jonah whispered. But Nash wasn't so sure. Bram wasn't standing anymore. He was sitting again, watching, present, but still. Nash loaded a warning round into the launcher and fired it toward the brush. It exploded in a pop of red and white. The hyenas flinched and backed off, but they weren't gone. "They'll wait," Nash muttered. "They're smart and hungry." Jonah set up another line of lights, this time closer, tighter. He was shaking again. "I hate this. I hate just waiting." Ilara's voice cut through the dark. "She's crashing?" Nash turned back. Rhea's body had gone still again. Her eyes rolled back. The vitals monitor beeped flat for 3 beats before flickering. "Third cub is blocked," Ilara said. "She's too weak to push. What do you need?" "I need a miracle, or an extra pair of hands." She didn't have either, so she did what few vets would attempt outside a hospital. Ilara performed the maneuver by feel, one hand inside, the other pressing from outside. The lioness didn't respond. No twitch, no groan. Her body had entered a shock state, heart barely pumping, respiratory rate collapsing. Nash applied pressure to her shoulder, anchoring her in place. Jonah held the oxygen mask. Ilara whispered, "Come on, move!" Then the cub slipped free, limp, smaller than the others, completely still. Ilara stared at it. "I don't know if this one—" Nash took it quickly. He didn't think. He acted. He cleared the airways, wrapped it tightly, then began compressions using just 2 fingers. 1, 2, 3. Breath. Nothing. Again. 1, 2, 3. Breath. Still nothing. Then in the silence, a flutter, a flick of its paw, a sound like wet paper rustling. It was alive. Jonah let out a yell and immediately clamped his hands over his mouth. The canyon held its breath again. Bram stood. He walked toward them slowly, paws silent on the sand. The hyenas, sensing the shift, retreated into the dark. He reached Rhea's body, lowered his head, and sniffed the third cub in Nash's hands. Then he did something no one expected. He leaned down and gently pressed his forehead to the cub's body. Just once. A gesture so precise, so deliberate, it stole the words from all 3 of them. "I think he knows," Ilara said quietly. That it almost died. Nash placed the third cub next to the other 2 beneath the lamp. The silver one stirred, pressing against its siblings instinctively. The second was already asleep, belly rising and falling in steady rhythm. The third remained motionless, but breathing. "They made it," Jonah said. "All of them." Ilara didn't smile. Not yet. She looked at Rhea. Her body was still. Her chest rose and fell only slightly. Her eyelids fluttered. But she was alive. "We're not out of it yet," she said. "We still have to keep them stable." Nash looked at the cubs, then at the lion who had guarded them with silence instead of violence. Bram stood now like a statue beside Rhea, his eyes closed, his tail still. "They wouldn't have made it without him," Nash said. Ilara nodded. "None of us would have." In the canyon silence, beneath a flickering lamp and a sky full of stars, the three cubs slept side by side, each one a breath away from not existing. And none of them, not even Bram, knew that what had just emerged wasn't just life. It was legacy, born in dust, breathed into the world by human hands, and witnessed by a king who never spoke a word. By the time the third cub settled into a slow, irregular rhythm of breath, the canyon had fallen into a hush that felt neither safe nor still. It was the quiet of fatigue, of something sacred just barely salvaged. The three newborns lay curled together beneath the thermal lamp, pressed into one another like fragments of a single will to survive. Nash crouched near them, his eyes flicking between the vitals monitor and Rhea's unmoving form. Her pulse was there, but only just. "She's cold," Ilara said softly, checking her extremities. "If her temperature drops another 2 degrees, her organs could begin shutting down." Nash nodded. "She needs transport." "We can't do that now," Jonah whispered. "The hyenas are still out there, and this terrain, there's no clear route for a stretcher." "She'll die if we leave her here." "She'll die if we move her too fast," Ilara added. "And if we leave these cubs behind, they'll die for sure." Bram stood a few feet away, still as a monolith, tail gently sweeping the dust. He hadn't blinked in minutes. Every time Nash turned to check on him, the lion's gaze was already there, watching, waiting. Jonah sat down on the rocky ground, exhausted. "So what do we do? Just sit here and hope the cold doesn't kill her before the sun comes up?" "No," Ilara said. "We stabilize her as much as we can, and we learn what we're dealing with." She turned to the cubs. Her eyes rested longest on the pale one, the one that had stopped breathing and clawed its way back, the one that didn't look like the others. "I need better light." Jonah aimed the lantern directly at the cubs while Ilara pulled on a fresh pair of gloves. She moved slowly, gently separating the smallest from its siblings. It squeaked at the disturbance, but didn't resist. "Hold the reflector steady," she told Jonah. Nash moved to her side. "What are we looking for?" "Confirmation." The pale cub's fur shimmered faintly under the beam. Not white. No. Closer to ash, to pewter. A ghost of gold beneath the frost. But more than the color, it was the markings that caught her breath. "They're real," she whispered. "What are?" "Stripes." "Stripes?" Jonah blinked. "You mean like a tiger?" "Not exactly. They're faint. Genetic ghosts, but they're there." Nash leaned closer. "That's not a recessive pattern?" "No. This shouldn't be possible." She examined the paw pads next, light gray, mottled with black specks. The ears were smaller, rounded. The eye shape, though still closed, was wider set than the others. Everything about the cub said lion, but not quite. "It's a hybrid," she said at last, "but not in the way we understand it. It's not from another species. It's nature pushing back." Pushing back? Crossbreeding, maybe. A genetic quirk, a mutation, something recessive awakened under environmental stress. Extreme stress. This cub is what happens when survival becomes its own evolution. Jonah just stared. "It's weird. Beautiful, but weird." "It shouldn't exist," she murmured. "Yeah, but it does," Nash added. "Just like Rhea wasn't supposed to survive the poachers. And yet, here we are." Ilara wrapped the cub in soft gauze and placed it back beneath the lamp. The other two nuzzled it immediately. "We should name it," Jonah said. Nash raised a brow. "Name it?" "Yeah, I don't know. Something that fits. I mean, it's not just another lion." Ilara looked at it again. Quiet. "Ash?" Jonah tilted his head. "Ash? Like from fire?" "No," she said, "like from what comes after the burning, after the world changes." Nash didn't argue. He looked at the cub again. Somehow the name made sense. Ash. As if sensing their attention, the tiny creature stretched its paw out and touched one of its siblings. Not clumsily, but with something that felt almost deliberate. A few yards away, Bram let out a low sound. Not quite a growl, not quite a sigh. Nash turned toward him. The lion hadn't moved closer, but his posture had changed. He was no longer watching the cubs, he was watching the canyon beyond. Nash stood slowly, following his line of sight. A flicker of movement, another hyena, then another, then more. They weren't testing anymore. They were regrouping. "Time to reinforce," Nash muttered. He moved to the outer flare line, adjusting the positions and checking the battery packs. Ilara joined him with a second flashlight, their beams crossing over boulders and brush. "Do you think Bram will fight them?" she asked. "If he has to," Nash said. "But he's got limits, and he's been here just as long as us. No water, no rest. Even kings get tired." Ilara looked over her shoulder. "We have to call this in. We can't hold out till morning. We need support. Drones, aerial thermal scans, emergency airlift. We won't get approval until daylight. We'll lose her by then." Nash paused. "There's one thing we haven't tried." "What?" He pulled a device from his vest, an old sat beacon, rarely used except in medical emergencies. It bypassed standard protocol and transmitted directly to state-level dispatch, activating a potential life flight response for endangered species trauma. A last resort. But it came with weight, paperwork, legal reviews, environmental insurance claims. It wasn't just a button. It was a risk. "You're serious?" Ilara asked. "I'm not burying another mother." He pressed the beacon. A small light blinked red, then green. A message sent into the night. Back in the shelter, Jonah was leaning over the cubs. "Hey," he said suddenly. "Ash is moving." They turned. The pale cub was trying to stand, its legs wobbling like reeds, eyes still shut, ears twitching. It pressed against its siblings, then took a step, just one, then collapsed. But it had tried. Ilara knelt again, her voice soft. "That shouldn't be possible. They don't attempt to walk for days." "Maybe it's not about instinct," Nash said. "Maybe it's about something else." She looked at him. "You think it knows?" "I think something does." The wind picked up again. The flares trembled. Above them, a distant hum began to build, low at first, then louder. Jonah stared upward. "Is that—" "A chopper," Nash confirmed. "They heard us." Relief swept through the team like breath after drowning. They weren't alone. Not anymore. As the rescue aircraft circled above, casting a spotlight that painted the rocks in stark contrast, Bram backed away. He didn't flee. He didn't challenge. He simply returned to Rhea's side and lay down beside her, shoulder to shoulder, as if guarding her from the sky itself. And in that moment, under the floodlight of human technology and the weight of nature's miracle, Ash raised his head again. Still blind, still small, but undeniably alive. And the world that never meant to let him exist watched him refuse to die. The helicopter landed with calculated precision, blades kicking up dust that swept across the canyon like a second storm. Nash shielded the cubs from the debris with his body, crouching low as the medical crew disembarked with swift, practiced movements. Two medics in wildlife trauma gear ran toward Rhea, while a third began assembling the portable containment unit for the newborns. It looked more like a neonatal ICU than anything built for the wild. Ilara stood frozen for a second, her eyes locked on the blinking monitors still clinging to Rhea's flank. "She's hanging on," she said quietly, almost to herself. "Just barely." The lead medic, a woman named Tess from the state's Advanced Wildlife Response Team, approached with clinical calm. "Vitals?" "Heart rate's erratic," Ilara answered. "Hypothermia. 3 cubs delivered. 1 in respiratory distress earlier, now stabilized. 1 strong. 1 different." Tess didn't react to the last word, but her gaze flicked to the smallest of the 3. "The silver one?" Ilara nodded. "We've named him Ash?" "Documented?" "We'll file once we stabilize her. This isn't about records yet." Tess motioned toward the second medic, who began lifting the oxygen unit closer to Rhea's head. Nash helped gently reposition her body so the access ports from the mobile oxygen tank could be aligned properly. Rhea didn't move, but a soft groan rumbled in her chest as cool air reached her lungs. "She's still with us," Nash said. "Just." Behind them, Bram rose to his feet. The medics all froze. "He's not aggressive," Nash said quickly. "But stay slow. Deliberate." Bram stared at them for a long moment, then did something that would stay etched into Jonah's memory forever. He stepped backward, just enough to give room. It wasn't surrender. It was trust. The medics moved fast, wrapping Rhea's torso in a thermal blanket and stabilizing her limbs with padded braces. An IV line was inserted with surgical precision into her foreleg. Warm saline, glucose, and a mixture of electrolyte solutions began to flow into her body, bolstered by the kind of emergency wildlife care protocols usually reserved for million-dollar zoo animals or insurance-backed conservation specimens. The contrast was jarring, high-tech gear buzzing beneath stars that had looked down on 1,000 years of raw survival. Tess moved to the cubs next. Jonah hovered nearby, refusing to leave their side. "They all breathing now?" she asked. "Yes," Jonah said, "but Ash, he tries to walk. Already." Tess examined the pale cub, her gloved hands gentle. Muscle tones better than expected, eye development delayed, heartbeat steady. She looked at Nash. "How premature is this litter?" 2 to 3 days, maybe. We didn't expect labor yet. Her vitals went critical too fast to know." Tess nodded. "This one's rare. Could be a genetic mosaic. We'll test later." Jonah blinked. "A what?" "A living anomaly. 2 genetic patterns expressed in one animal. Could be harmless, could be something else." Ilara cut in. "Doesn't matter right now. He's alive. That's enough." They moved swiftly, transferring the cubs into a temperature-controlled case lined with thermal fleece. Ash squirmed weakly when separated from his siblings, letting out a soft cry. Jonah winced. "Do we have to move them yet?" "Yes," Tess said firmly. "If Rhea arrests in the air, we can't risk them being crushed or exposed." "But she'll smell them in the chopper, hear them. It might keep her anchored." The stretcher for Rhea was lowered carefully. Nash guided the process, one hand still resting on her mane. Bram watched, unmoving, but the tension in his shoulders was visible. Every movement of the humans was being measured, weighed. As the team lifted her onto the stretcher, Rhea let out a sound, thin, broken, but unmistakably maternal. Jonah leaned in. "That's the first time she's made a noise since the second cub." "She knows," Ilara said. "She knows they're here." Once secured, the team turned to the final challenge: extraction. The helicopter couldn't hover longer than 15 minutes. Battery draw was high due to the altitude and weight. Every second mattered. As the medics began hauling equipment back to the aircraft, Tess turned to Nash. "We need one of you with her." "I'll go," Ilara said instantly. Nash hesitated. "Are you sure?" "She needs continuity of care. You stay with Bram. Keep him calm. You've got the history." Jonah looked up. "And me?" "You stay too," Nash said. "I'll need your hands." They began the climb with Rhea, each step deliberate. The helicopter lifted slowly as the stretcher was guided up the ramp. Ash's case followed, still warm with soft breathing. Then the doors closed, and they were gone. The sound of the blades faded into the stars. Silence returned. Jonah sank down onto the nearest flat stone. "Do you think they'll make it?" "She has a chance now," Nash said. "And Ash?" Nash looked toward the ridgeline where Bram stood again, staring at the path the helicopter had taken. "He's the only reason any of this was possible." Bram didn't move. Not for an hour. Not even when the flares finally sputtered out. He stood like a sentinel, watching the sky, as if waiting for something more than a rescue, something the wind might return. And deep in the night, just as Jonah began to drift off beside the collapsed tent, Nash caught a sound, barely there. A single cry, distant but real. And even Bram, the silent guardian, turned his head toward the breeze. Because sometimes what saves us isn't power. It's the sound of something small, something helpless, refusing to disappear. A breath, a heartbeat, a silver cry against a black sky. The transport took 97 minutes. That was longer than ideal, but faster than expected, given the turbulence and the fragility of what was aboard. Rhea remained unconscious for most of the flight, her vitals hovering between collapse and recovery. Ilara monitored her every second, eyes never leaving the readout panel on the portable medical unit. The 3 cubs, each housed in separate warmed compartments but close enough to share scent and sound, stirred occasionally. Ash remained the weakest, but he was breathing. When the helicopter touched down on the helipad behind the Arizona Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, it was still dark. The building glowed softly in the desert night, like an oasis, its windows lined with dim gold light, its walls humming with quiet preparation. A team of specialists was already waiting, armed not with curiosity, but with commitment. No press, no cameras, just people who knew what it meant to save what others considered impossible. Rhea was moved quickly into a temperature-controlled enclosure in the intensive care wing. Ilara walked beside her the entire time, hand on the gurney rail, whispering under her breath. Words Rhea couldn't hear, but maybe still felt. The moment the Lioness was stabilized, IVs checked, oxygen flowing, Ilara turned her attention to the cubs. Jonah arrived 20 minutes later by ground transport, exhausted but alert, still dusty from the canyon, eyes red from wind and worry. Nash came with him, silent but carrying a weight in his step. Neither spoke as they stepped into the glass-paneled observation room outside the medical suite. "She's still alive," Ilara said quietly. "And Ash, he's responding." Jonah pressed his face to the glass, peering into the incubator where Ash lay curled like a question mark, his silver coat catching the lamplight with an ethereal sheen. "He looks stronger," Jonah said. "He is," Ilara replied, "but he's still got a long road ahead. Lungs underdeveloped, low muscle tone, temperature instability. We'll need to monitor him round the clock." Nash leaned against the wall. "And the other 2? "Thriving. They've already begun to nuzzle and root. They'll be nursing within days." "But not Ash?" Ilara shook her head. "Not yet. He's not ready. He needs more support." A nurse entered the room and handed Ilara a tablet. She scanned it quickly. "Blood work confirms what we suspected," she said. "Ash carries an extremely rare genetic variant, likely a mutation triggered by extreme stress in utero. It's not harmful, but it's unique." "Like what?" Jonah asked. "Like nothing we've seen in modern lion populations," she answered. "He's his own category." Jonah smiled faintly. "That fits." Nash said nothing. He stared through the glass, eyes narrowed slightly. "He hasn't made a sound since we landed," he said. "He's waiting." "For what?" Jonah asked. "For him," Nash said. They all turned slowly toward the edge of the compound, beyond the far fence. The dawn was just beginning to rise, and in the pinkish light of morning a silhouette appeared at the outer boundary. Bram. He stood still, as if sculpted from sandstone, his mane lifting in the gentle breeze, his eyes fixed directly on the building. Ilara stepped outside first, the others behind her. They didn't get close. They didn't have to. The lion wasn't there for them. He was there for what he couldn't see, but knew was inside. Jonah's voice broke the quiet. How did he know where to go? Instinct, Nash said, and something more. Every morning for the next 3 days, Bram returned. He never crossed the barrier, never approached the gates. He simply stood at the edge of the reserve, silent, unmoving, waiting as the sun climbed the sky. And every morning, as if pulled by invisible thread, Ash stirred. Not the others, not the strong ones. Only him. When Bram arrived, Ash's ears would perk, his tiny body would shift, his blind eyes would twitch beneath closed lids. He'd reach with soft paws toward nothing. But it wasn't nothing. It was blood, bone, connection. On the 4th morning, Ilara stepped into the nursery alone. The other 2 cubs were asleep, curled together like soft commas in a story not yet finished. But Ash was awake, struggling to lift his head. She crouched beside the incubator, whispering his name. His ears flicked. She picked him up carefully, wrapping him in cloth warmed by the radiant heater. His body fit in the cup of her palms. So small, so defiant. She carried him to the window that faced the eastern ridge. Bram was there. Ilara held Ash up gently, so the cub faced the distant lion. Ash didn't cry. But he moved. He pressed his head against the glass. Ilara swallowed the lump in her throat. "He knows," she said. Behind her, Nash stepped in quietly. He said nothing at first. Then he walked to the glass and looked out. "He hasn't left since the moment we took her," he said. "I check the monitors every night. He sleeps there. He eats there. He's waiting." "For her?" Ilara asked. "For all of them." She nodded. "She's improving, slowly, but we're almost ready." "Then let's plan it," Nash said. "Let's bring them home." That night they drafted the plan. Limited travel time, soft suspension carrier, sedation monitoring, backup medkits, and perimeter protection. The terrain was rough, but with 4-wheel clearance and the weather holding steady, the odds were in their favor. They didn't want to wait longer than necessary, because they knew Bram wouldn't. And Rhea? She was already trying to stand. On the 5th morning, Ilara entered the recovery enclosure and found the lioness on her feet, weak, trembling, but upright. The moment she saw Ilara, her head tilted, ears twitching. Ilara held up her hand slowly. "Easy, girl. You're okay." Rhea sniffed the air. Then she let out a low sound, a mother's sound. Ilara smiled. "Yes, they're still here, and they're coming with you." Outside, the sun rose higher, and on the edge of the reserve, the sentinel waited. Because some returns don't need words. They only need the will to endure, and the hope that somewhere, something you loved is still listening. The sky held the soft colors of first light, the kind that doesn't speak but listens. Gentle purples, hushed amber, the quiet before heat or noise. The team stood in the release field behind the Arizona Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, their movements calm but deliberate. It wasn't just another drop-off. This was a homecoming. Rhea stood inside the soft-walled transport enclosure, awake and alert. Her breath was even now, deeper. The swelling had gone down, and her strength, while not full, had returned enough to carry her weight. She was pacing slightly, not from anxiety, but from awareness. She knew where she was. She knew something was about to happen. The 3 cubs, now 4 weeks old, tumbled at her feet like miniature storms. The 2 larger siblings wrestled noisily, batting each other's faces, growling in short, chirping bursts. Ash remained the smallest, but he was moving more confidently now. His fur still shimmered silver in the sun, the faint stripe-like markings becoming clearer each day. His vision had finally sharpened. His paws had grown stronger. He walked differently than the others, not clumsy, not bold, but with a kind of quiet observation. Every step felt measured, as if he was already aware of the world's weight. Jonah leaned against the frame of the gate, his arms folded. "You sure we're ready?" "We're past ready," Ilara said. "If we wait any longer, she'll chew through the gate." Nash checked the satellite collar one last time. "Tracker's online, battery's full. She'll ping every 15 minutes for the next month." "And after that?" "She won't need us." The small team stepped back. No speeches, no fanfare. Just hands on levers and eyes on the family inside. Ilara met Nash's gaze. "Ready?" He nodded. She pulled the latch. The gate swung open with a smooth, quiet click. Dust curled at the lioness's paws as she stepped forward into the wild. She paused at the edge, sniffing the breeze. The wind carried familiar things: dry rock, cactus bloom, a recent rain to the east, and something else. Rhea rumbled low in her chest. Her cubs followed, clumsy and excited, falling into a ragged line behind her. The two stronger ones bounded ahead, tripping over each other in the way of young things learning their strength. Ash stayed closer to her flank, always watching, always listening. They crossed the field slowly, the gate closing gently behind them. Then, from the distant ridge, he appeared. Bram! He moved with deliberate grace, his silhouette backlit by the sun, mane glowing like copper flames. He made no sound as he approached, just walked, each step quiet but sure. Rhea froze, then stepped forward alone. The two met in the clearing without a sound. She lowered her head. He mirrored her. They touched foreheads, slow, pressing close, not as mates reclaimed, but as survivors, as parents, as something older than words. Behind them, the cubs paused. The two big ones moved first, bounding toward Bram, who sniffed them once, then nudged them softly. They responded with squeaks and swipes, as if they'd known him their whole lives. Ash hung back. He looked at Ilara just once, before turning. Then he walked, small steps across the open ground, until he stood at Bram's feet. The great lion lowered his head. Ash raised a paw, and placed it gently on Bram's nose. Nash exhaled, the breath he'd been holding since the moment the gate opened. "He knows," he whispered. Ilara nodded. So does Bram. The family moved together then, turning toward the valley. 5 figures, 1 proud, 1 resilient, 3 uncertain, but whole. Jonah squinted through the morning light. "Where do you think they'll go?" "Wherever the land lets them," Nash said. "And wherever it doesn't, Ash will find a way." They stood for a long time, watching the family disappear into the landscape, their shapes shrinking against the rise and fall of the land until only dust remained. Later, in the field notes Ilara submitted to the Wildlife Department, she wrote a single line beyond the data and charts. "We didn't just rescue a lioness. We witnessed the birth of something the wild hadn't shown us in decades, a new kind of resilience." And in the notes Nash wrote, though he never shared them, he included this: "Some lives don't just survive. They rewrite what survival looks like." Back at the center, under soft light and sterile silence, the case for the rescue was archived, along with hundreds of others. But none of them were quite like this one. No form, no medical billing code, no conservation database could fully capture what emerged from that canyon. Not just 3 cubs, not just Rhea, but Ash, a creature born in crisis, shaped by dust, carved by silence, and watched, always, by a father who waited long enough to see the impossible step into the world, because sometimes what changes everything isn't a roar, it's a whisper, and someone willing to answer it.